BRICS are ditching the IMF. Global alert, the BRICS are breaking free from the US dollar. Is this the end of the IMF and the United States global power? The BRICS nations are strongly confronting and challenging the international financial system. Why is the Global South unhappy with the IMF? The United States is extremely worried now that the BRICS have declared their financial independence. Is this the end of IMF's global dominance? Today, emerging powers and countries in the Global South are demanding a major overhaul of the international financial system, which is dominated by institutions like the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Trade Organization, WTO. They argue that the current rules unfairly benefit richer nations and don't reflect the needs and priorities of the developing world. The BRICS, representing major economies like Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are leading this push to reform a financial system they see as outdated and unrepresentative of the 21st century. The Global South argues that the policies imposed by the IMF, often in the form of structural adjustment programs, have had disastrous consequences in several countries: increased poverty, social crises, and erosion of national sovereignty. Next, we'll look at historical examples where IMF loans and policies had devastating effects on different nations, from Egypt and Brazil to Venezuela, Morocco, and Nigeria. Egypt, the bread riots of 1977. In January 1977, Egypt faced one of the most critical episodes in its modern history. As a condition for receiving financial support from the IMF, the Egyptian government decided to remove subsidies for essential foods like bread, sugar, and rice. These measures caused an immediate increase in the prices of basic goods, pushing the population to a breaking point. On January 18th, massive strikes and protests began in cities like Cairo, Alexandria, and Suez. Workers, students, and citizens took to the streets to demonstrate against the government, attacking government buildings, police stations, and luxury properties. The response was severe. President Anwar Sadat deployed the army, leading to violent clashes that left around 80 dead and over 550 injured. Finally, social pressure forced the government to back down and restore the subsidies. Brazil, economic crisis and austerity in 1988. In the late 1990s, Brazil was going through a deep economic crisis. To stabilize its economy and curb the devaluation of its currency, the country asked the IMF for a bailout package of $1.15 billion. However, this financial assistance was conditional on the implementation of strict austerity policies and structural reforms. Cuts in public spending for essential services like healthcare and education, tax increases that impacted the middle and lower classes. These measures generated massive protests and strikes across the country, especially among unions and citizens who saw poverty and inequality increasing. Despite criticism, some analysts believe that these policies helped control inflation and laid the foundation for economic recovery. A significant milestone occurred in 2005 when the government of Lula da Silva repaid the IMF loans early, symbolizing the recovery of the country's financial autonomy. Morocco. The Casablanca riots of 1981. In 1981, Morocco, under the leadership of King Hassan II, implemented economic measures demanded by the IMF to reduce its budget deficit. These measures included cuts in subsidies for essential foods, which caused a drastic increase in prices: flour over 40%, sugar over 50%, and cooking oil over 28%. On May 29th of that year, thousands of people took to the streets of Casablanca, especially from the most impoverished neighborhoods. The demonstrations quickly turned violent, with attacks on banks, luxury stores, and properties. The government's repression was brutal. It's estimated that between 66 and 637 people died, most of them young people from low-income backgrounds. This episode revealed the social and economic tensions that arise when austerity policies are applied in contexts where a large part of the population depends on subsidized goods. Nigeria, structural adjustments and unrest, 1989. In 1986, Nigeria adopted a structural adjustment program designed in collaboration with the IMF. The goal was to restructure the economy, reduce oil dependency, and stabilize public finances. However, the policies had immediate and devastating effects: currency devaluation that generated inflation and increased the prices of essential goods, removal of subsidies, which worsened the cost of living for the poorest sectors. Protests began in May 1989 with student demonstrations at the University of Benin. These quickly escalated into nationwide riots with clashes between protesters and security forces. The government's harsh response left casualties and deepened the country's political instability. Venezuela, the Caracazo in 1989. In February 1989, the government of Carlos Andrés Pérez adopted austerity measures recommended by the IMF, such as the elimination of subsidies and an increase in transportation fares. On February 27th, protests began in Guarenas near Caracas, when citizens reacted to the increase in prices. The demonstrations quickly turned into looting and massive riots known as El Caracazo. The government's response was violent. Military forces were deployed, resulting in an official figure of 277 dead, although independent organizations estimate between 2,000 and 5,000 victims. This event left a deep wound in Venezuelan society and laid the groundwork for the rise of Hugo Chavez, who later capitalized on social discontent to reach the presidency in 1998. The IMF and criticism from the Global South. The Global South's criticisms of the IMF focus on austerity policies. They prioritize debt repayment over the well-being of the population, erosion of national sovereignty. Reforms are imposed without considering local particularities. Inequality in decision-making. Developed countries have greater influence within the IMF. Social impact. Cuts affect essential sectors like healthcare and education, generating more poverty and inequality. The experiences of countries like Egypt, Brazil, Morocco, Nigeria, and Venezuela show the consequences of an international financial system that, according to the Brics and the Global South, needs urgent reform. The Brics are proposing a new economic era, more inclusive, fairer, and oriented towards sustainable development. Are we ready for a financial system that truly reflects the conditions and needs of the 21st century?